Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of The Suspense is Killing Me. And we have the one and only Mike Allen.
Great to be here, Lucas. Although, unfortunately, there are lots and lots of Mike Allens, but you have the one that writes horror fiction.
You're the only one that matters right now, man. I don't know
Right,
any.
exactly.
I don't even know that I really know any other Mike Allens. Should I know a whole bunch of other Mike Allens? Are they?
Well, there's the one that founded Politico and Axios.
Oh,
Yeah, and when I was a journalist, he and I actually crossed paths once, which was fun. But and I'd have people sending me emails saying, "Hey, great story about the election," and I'd have to write back, "That was not me."
that must have gotten real fun with the social media during.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a trip.
I
He and
saw
I
that
are
happen with
friends on Facebook.
Justin Tuck was a famous football player for the Giants. There's a guy, Justin Tucker, I think his name is, who's a kicker for the Baltimore Ravens. And when the Ravens would have these crazy games, people would be blowing Justin Tuck's account up. And he's like, "You got the wrong football player." It's not me.
Social media is.
Yeah. Anyway, well, dude, we talked about doing this. Man, it's almost a year ago now.
Yeah, it's getting there. I think it was at Halloween Hangover 2 in Richmond.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was the last time we saw each other.
Right.
And I was so stoked to see you because we had met previously, and I was like just ecstatic to run into you again, and your wonderful wife and all the great people that were there. We were all able to hang out, and I was like, dude, we have got to get you on the show.
I'm very flattered that you invited me.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I'm flattered to be here.
Yeah, man.
Delighted to be here.
We talked a little bit about the format of the show before we came live, and if you guys have been watching this, you know that we like to dive into the secret lives of our authors a little bit. And Mike has been forewarned that I'm going to ask him what his life is like outside of writing. So, he said a little bit of ample time to think about this answer.
So this is this may make me sound like a bit of a pitiable creature because I don't have a lot of life outside of writing. I mean, I write in my spare time. I write for my day job. The previous day job I had, I was a writer. So writing is pretty much what I'm doing. I wouldn't say I'm doing it constantly, but definitely most of the time, it's what I'm occupied with. Things that I like to do that aren't writing include hiking, and this past Sunday, from when we are recording this, Anita and I went on a hike to the Cascades in Giles County in Southwest Virginia, which is where we live. And that was my first hike since having knee surgery in July of last year. So it was really wonderful to be able to resume that, get out and absorb nature and all the sort of wonder and eeriness and mystery of it. And I did learn that walking 2 miles downhill is much tougher on my knees than it used to be. So major life lesson learned there. But I managed to get through it, and I'm very proud of that.
That's good, man.
I'm looking forward to doing that again.
And you're a big thrash metal fan, which is like
I am
huge theme on the show, by the way.
So I am really into, I suppose I'm mostly kind of an old school metal fan. I recently did another podcast with a fellow who's kind of into like the latest in death metal, and I could see the look of disappointment in his face when I was like, well, lately I've been listening to Judas Priest, Motorhead.
The classics, man.
But I do also love thrash. One of what has to be a sign that the times are just really really different now is about 5 years ago or so. I can't remember the exact year, but it was pre-COVID.
Mm.
Slayer, supported by Primus
Oh,
and Ministry, and not exactly Pantera, but Phil Anselmo was singing. They came to Salem. They came to Salem, which is the city adjacent to Roanoke, which is where I live. Uh, and uh, and that concert was just amazing. And being only 5 minutes away from it was just kind of mind-boggling. So you might wonder, well, why would that be mind-boggling? Well, um, so once upon a time, Southwest Virginia would not exactly, I think, have qualified as a hotbed of thrash metal fandom.
right.
Uh, Salem, in particular, is somewhat notorious. If you've ever seen the rodeo scene in the first Borat movie, that's where it was filmed. And in fact, at the very same venue where Slayer came to play.
What?
Yes.
Yes. Place just got infinitely cooler.
Yeah. So that was super cool that myself and Anita and my younger brother Ed, who's also who's also a big metal fan, were able to go see that. Of course, Soulfly,
Oh,
uh, a couple, I think it was the year before that, Soulfly played Lynchburg, which was that's where Liberty University is based.
yeah, I could just see Max Cavalera up there.
He was there. I saw him. yeah,
That's wild, man.
yeah. But the
You kind
times
of blow
there
my
are
mind that
changing.
that you saw Primus and Slayer on the same stage in the same day. That's kind of crazy because they're,
That was an amazing show.
I mean,
It really
Primus
it
is
really was.
phenomenal live,
Yeah.
but they're not exactly in the same genre as Slayer.
No, I mean, Primus was sort of. I guess they were. Um, I don't know that I would call them stoner metal exactly, but they sort of seem to represent
Yeah.
that demographic in that particular lineup.
Oh yeah.
There was lots and lots and lots of bass soloing, which was, obviously,
Les
you know,
Claypool, man.
yeah, obviously it was great. Yeah.
That's wild, man. Oh my gosh. Well, I was not expecting to hear Pantera, Primus, and Slayer in the same lineup. And then who was the other band that was
Ministry.
Ministry?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the industrial. I mean, that's just
Yeah. That, and they
wow.
did, they performed a whole bunch of songs from Psalm 69, which is their probably their greatest album, and also A Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste,
Yeah,
the album that came right before. So yeah, and those are albums that I love. So it was just you know a wonderful evening.
man, that's wild, man.
Yeah. Although the most recent thing, Anita. So okay, we're going to be seeing Judas Priest on their new tour,
Okay.
but the most recent concert that we've attended was Highland.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They performed in Greensboro, and that, oh my God, that show, that show was just stunning.
I
Uh,
mean, they're a production.
yeah. It was very elaborate.
Yes.
Every aspect of it, the staging, the choreography, the lighting, the overlapping vocals, yeah, it was. I'm so glad we went and saw that. We had kind of a scare because this was much, this wasn't as far out from my surgery as we are now, and I had I I had a relapse with my knee in terms of recovery. and
Nice.
so we had a sort of scare as to whether we'd be able to even do it, but we did it.
I think Stephanie Ellis was, and we were, I was mentioning her earlier. I think she and I have a record for the longest episode on the show so far. I think she's the one who first introduced me to them. She's
Oh,
like, she's like, dude,
it's
you
so
have to check
good.
them out. I was kind of blown away when I looked into them. I was like, wow.
Well, I was thrilled that we could see them live because that was what I saw first is the videos of their live
Yeah,
performances, which are just
exactly.
amazing.
Yeah, it was on YouTube. I was just blown away. Um, Fascinating stuff. So, did you grow up around there?
So I am originally from Minnesota,
Okay,
and my family took kind of a long way to get to Southwest Virginia. Uh,
gotcha.
my I only spent like maybe the first year or so of my life in Minnesota,
Mm.
and then my dad, on the strength of his PhD in microbiology, got a job teaching at the University of Guam.
What?
So my actual first childhood memories are Guam.
Now, I did not expect you to say Guam when you said we took a long way to get from
Right,
Minnesota.
right. No, I mean it quite literally. Uh,
Wow.
and so I have this. I'm pretty sure it's because of Guam that I've had this lifelong fixation with spiders. Uh, Here's where I hold up the cover to my second story collection, the spider tapestries,
Nice.
with this woman cuddling what I think is a huntsman spider. and, and yeah,
Oh
so Guam had these great big yellow spiders about the leg span about as big as your hand when you're a little
yeah.
kid. Oh man, it makes an impression. and but from there we moved to this is because of my dad's academic career, not because of like moving around in the military, which was
Right.
what everyone always assumes. We moved to a suburb outside of Chicago, and then we moved to Wise, Virginia, which is in kind of the far southwest point. Virginia is kind of shaped like a pie slice,
Yeah.
and the sort of coal mining communities are in the Appalachian Mountains at the westernmost point. So that's where we were. My dad was teaching at Clinch Valley College, and those were probably, for better or for worse, my most formative years, as in terms of my life experiences and childhood,
Mm.
early teen years. And then we moved to Roanoke, and I'm still here. So um, my dad is no longer with us, but my mom and my brothers still live here. So Anita and I are not very far from kind of the main family layer. But I've been able, um, you know, I appreciate Roanoke as a town much more, as an adult than I did as a teen.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of uh, it's I've been able to make some things happen here that have been worked out fairly well for me. I like to think so. We are staying put, at least for
It's
the
home.
moment.
It's home, man. So, where along that path did you pick up your love for like suspenseful fiction? Was it in Virginia? Was it like, tell me, I want like this Appalachian horror, like,
So, um, so I'm looking to see if I can reach. If you can,
do you have the original book?
if you can stand me,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
can
You do
stand,
your thing, man.
if you can stand my not exactly photogenic frame in the picture for a moment.
Yeah, you did.
so so I kind of date it back to uh, the third grade, and this would have been in Wise,
Wow.
attending elementary school there, and I actually wrote about it. Here, this is my second story collection, aftermath of an industrial accident. There's actually a piece in here that describes what I'm about to talk about, which is, um, I actually was not, as a kid, like really into horror. In fact, very much the opposite. And
Big romance reader.
um, so what was I actually? I'm trying to think what my I think the majority of books that I had read by that age were, sorry, I'm doing a quick little internet search to see if I'm remembering correctly.
Reaching way back, man. Third
So
grade.
so so I may not have this, I may not have this exactly right, but my parents had bought for me a a, a a whole series of picture books.
Hmm.
I believe they were called Little Anchor books, but
Yeah.
I'm not, yeah, and
Yep.
they were Bible stories.
Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about.
They were Bible stories. That was probably what I had read the most
Mhm.
at that age. Maybe Dr. Seuss, Yertle the Turtle, uh,
Yeah.
and, and my third grade teacher, totally well meaning, on Halloween, gathered the class together in a circle and read us a couple of pieces from this this very book,
Yeah.
the Gold Bug and Other Tales of Mystery by Edgar Allan Poe. Um,
Nice.
and I think he just read The Raven and The Telltale Heart, which, that's like, if you're somebody who's into horror, those are sort of like junior Happy Meals for you.
Yep.
But for myself, as a pretty naive third grader who had never really thought about death
Hmm.
in any profound way at all, uh, they kind of ripped my mind open.
Wow.
And I ended up, from that day forward, actually having night terrors, because I had such a difficult time processing the concepts
Wow.
in Poe's writing, and I developed this like absolute morbid fascination, uh, where like I would go pick the book, I would go take the book off the shelf and flip through it, and and get creeped out even more by the pictures. and 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 I actually, would have these, I actually would have these sort of waking nightmares where I would picture, like things like, I don't know how well you can see
Dude, that's awesome.
the guy with the guy being threatened by the pendulum
Yeah,
there.
the pendulum, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so 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 that set off this sort of relationship with suspense. I wouldn't call it love hate. It was mostly hate, but I couldn't get it out of my head.
Well, then could
And
you, I mean, was it really hate then? Was it just kind of like an
I,
infat,
I didn't enjoy it.
it's
I,
like a
I
morbid curiosity?
Well, morbid curiosity was definitely a huge part of it. Like
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy it, but at the same time, I kept being drawn back to it. And this would there's a whole nother sort of track, where I, encountered J.R.R. Tolkien's work for the first time and became a huge fan of fantasy. Uh, and I guess, okay, so I guess I've gotten the timeline wrong a little bit. I believe it was in the second grade that I read The Hobbit.
What?
So by the time I encountered Edgar Allan Poe, I had read The Hobbit.
Dude, you read The Hobbit in second grade?
I did.
Wow.
I did. I couldn't remember it right away because I was thinking in terms of, of sort of the Poe timeline. But the reason for that is because the reason for that, and this is a funny story too, is because the Rankin Bass cartoon had
Mm.
aired on television, and my family watched it, and my dad uh, was just an absolute hardcore Tolkien fan.
Ah,
Considered the Lord of the Rings to be like the greatest book ever written. I'm
nice.
sure he's not alone in that,
Yeah.
but there are others who maybe would not agree. Uh, but so we watched that cartoon, and I was like, wow, I was it was like nothing I had encountered up to that point, and I was really kind of smitten with it. But my dad was like, that sucked. You should read the book. Read the book.
That's funny.
so that's why I had read The Hobbit at that.
Gotcha.
But
So
uh,
did you start writing young? Like, I mean, you had obviously had this really like you had a lot of literature influence at a young age.
so not a lot of published novelists have these stories about kind of writing their first novel when they were 8 years old or whatever. I didn't do that.
Yeah.
I did I did maybe kind of dabble at writing here and there. Uh, I think in terms of what I was creating, I had some signs of some skill at being a visual artist,
Oh, okay.
and that was the sort of thing my creativity often went into, was like, you know drawing monsters, or fantasy creatures, or things like that,
Hmm.
um where the love of suspense kind of becomes love. The details that I have to fill in is like, I ended up reading more horror. I read uh Lovecraft stories when I was still fairly young, uh and also stuff by Stephen King, Peter Straub. This is we're getting into my late childhood, early teen years here, and and I guess this is where I was entertained by these things as I read them, but then I would still have these night terrors. So definitely the love hate thing still happening. And then Clive Barker's Books of Blood came out, and when I read those, I guess I would have been like around 14, 15, 16, that range. Uh, a switch flipped in my head,
Hmm.
and and the way my mind responded to that kind of story went from oh my god, this is freaking me out, why am I doing this to myself, to wow, isn't that cool how he's doing that? I
Hmm.
really like the way he's doing this, if you get me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 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 I think it's at that point that I became more interested in writing that kind of story. Though
Wow.
I still didn't really tackle that in any hardcore way. Like, we have to go all the way to my last couple of years of college,
Hmm.
when I was an undergrad at Virginia Tech. That's when I really started writing in the way folks would think about a writer doing things.
Did you go to school for journalism?
No, actually, I didn't. I did have kind of a general communications minor.
Gotcha.
Uh, I have I haven't I've lived an entire life of never quite doing anything the correct way. So even though I was a newspaper reporter for 25 years, I never took a journalism class.
Good for you.
Uh, I managed to kind of get hired based on writing skill, and then learned how to journalist on the job.
Gotcha.
Uh,
Awesome, man. Well, I mean, so you end up falling in love with this moment where the switch is flipped,
right,
and I mean, you've got a great mind for writing. You've been doing it for so long now, and
right.
you were always artistically driven. It sounds like.
In some
Um,
way or another, yeah.
so I mean, it sounds like to me when that switch got flipped, it all just kind of came together. I mean, did you find that you were motivated to get into writing a certain format? Was it poetry, short stories? Like when you started writing, how did it kind of materialize for you at first?
So here's where I can share more evidence of always kind of doing things the wrong way. So I had
Don't tell me you wrote a 150,000 word novel right out the gate.
well, I mean, I did eventually do something close to that. It's not in any shape to be published, but and
Sure.
not, and some of it is now lost thanks to like changes in electronic storage format. But most of it still exists. But so I had this broad range of interests, which I guess I can explain a little better. I had an interest in music. I had an interest in music. I had an interest in visual art. I had an interest in theater, and I had an interest in writing. And regarding the interest in writing, I was interested in both poetry and fiction. And so 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 when I started kind of when my brain sort of narrowed it down enough
Mm,
that I committed more to writing than to any of these other forms. I still wrote short stories and poetry. I didn't. It took me a long time to actually attempt to write a novel, and that resulted in the gigantic unpublishable manuscript that I just referenced. But and I've since written other novels that are in better shape. But um, so 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 again, kind of a funny story. And I have to really tell this right. I have to kind of rewind back to having followed in my dad's footsteps in terms of being an uber Tolkien fan. Something that I did that he didn't. He basically felt that with the Lord of the Rings, the perfect story had already been written. Nothing else really mattered. But I was interested in finding more and more and more material that uh, you know could bring me that same thrill or bring new variations to it, etc. And at this time, we still lived in Wise,
mm,
so there wasn't. And of course, this was in the late 70s, early 80s. So there wasn't even like a Usenet community you could log into to talk to other fans. I pretty much on my own had to try to figure out you know who were the other authors, what were the other books
mm.
that did things in these realms. And so one of the things that I ended up doing was reading a book of essays about Tolkien.
Mm.
And one of these essays made comparisons between Tolkien's work and T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland.
Okay.
So, me not knowing any better at, I don't know, that might have been like sixth, seventh grade, probably around in there. I'm like, oh, so if so, one thing that I can read that will be kind of like Lord of the Rings is The Wasteland. So I'm going to go read that. And so, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland is not much like The Lord of the Rings, but it does have, a lot of fascinating mythic resonance and reference, and tarot imagery, which I just love, and cities of the dead, and
Nice.
all kinds of cool things in that long free verse poem. And so that started me on this path where I had this idea that poetry and prose just kind of go hand in hand. Later, I had a subscription to Asimov Science Fiction,
Okay.
which regularly publishes poetry, and so I just had this notion in my head that, oh, sci-fi writers, fantasy writers, they all write poetry, so this is something worth my learning how to do. And so I was writing, I was dabbling in both fiction and poetry basically simultaneously throughout my early years of trying to get published seriously. And my first breakthrough really came, to the degree you can call it a breakthrough, it really came in poetry.
Hmm.
I started to have a fair amount of success, placing poems in small press venues. And so success tends to inspire one to lean more in the direction where one is succeeding. So that
Right.
resulted in me writing even more poetry. And so a lot of I as and I mentioned this to you in kind of our pre-show talk. I have this entire sort of 20-year arc, uh, not unlike my 25-year newspaper career. I have like this entire like 20-year arc of 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 kind of getting poems published, becoming known for poetry, becoming somebody who advocates for poetry at conventions, and even for a little while running the Science Fiction Poetry Association.
That
And
blew my mind.
yeah, it's boy, that feels like such a long gone era to me in some ways. But then there are people out there who still basically know me
Hmm.
for that. So occasionally I find myself in some sort of surreal conversation with with somebody who kind of walks up to me kind of assuming I'm still that person. Uh but I roll with it.
They're like, this poem was my favorite. You're like, I don't remember writing that
Right.
25 years ago, dude.
Although mm, we I feel, I don't know how far off topic we're getting here, but
Yeah.
I'm going to, one of the coolest things that's happened to me along those lines was at, I think it was still a little while ago. It was at a ReaderCon in person, which I haven't been to since I guess 2019, so that must be when it happened. But Yoon Ha Lee, the multiple Hugo Award winning author, walked up to me and said to me that uh, one of the most formative pieces that they had read kind of on their creative journey was one of my poems.
Wow.
And the one that was published in Strange Horizons called Meta Rebellion. And the fact
Wow.
that I remember that should tell you how much that meant to me to hear that. Um, I was, I was
That's
just like,
awesome.
wow, thank you so much for sharing that. It's so nice to hear. Um, it's so nice to hear that poetry often feels pretty ephemeral. It's ephemeral,
Yeah.
so it's nice to hear, you know, that they do have lasting impact sometimes.
Well, I find it fascinating that you said something along the lines of, you're following the successful routes that you come across as you're on your journey as a writer, and that poetry was a successful route for you. Because I think there's this misconception that it's so hard to do anything in poetry, and I think it's fascinating that that was kind of one of your lit paths along the way was poetry.
So I don't want to. Of course, I would say this about writing in general. I would not want to give the impression that I think any writing path is easy.
Yeah, no.
There were certainly challenges involved in that. But there were certainly challenges involved in that. But that was definitely where uh when people there was definitely like when people were seeing my work, it
Mm,
was, in poetry form
right.
in places like, Asimov's or Strange Horizons or Weird Tales or things like that. And all this time I had also been uh working on trying to break in with short stories.
Mm,
And that took a while. It's I had some early, I guess, beginner's luck, you could call it, where I placed several stories in a row. And then uh and maybe, in hindsight, I think some of those venues maybe were more forgiving uh of the faults of those stories, because I go back and reread them and I'm like, this is never seeing the light of day again.
not going in the next collection.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But or at least not without some major rewriting like what
Right.
Harlan Ellison, would do.
Sure.
But uh I I guess in the mid 2000s, my efforts to break through in short fiction began to start paying off.
Mm,
Maybe not always literally paying, but paying off. And as that uh, as that became a more successful path, uh, and at the same time, uh, as I had reached a point in poetry where I began to feel that I had basically accomplished what could be accomplished with what I was doing, my efforts basically swiveled until I was mostly fiction focused.
gotcha.
So nowadays, uh, I do write poems once in a while, but it's very rare. However, I do, um, you know, one, I still like to show them off. So I still like to show them off. I have like several poetry collections from the mid. I think my last actual complete poet collection that was only poetry came out in 2014. And so I've begun kind of sneaking the poems that I've written since into my fiction collections. And hoping people will be willing to accept the peanut butter and chocolate
Well, you,
combination.
I mean, it jumped right out at me when I got, when you were, kind enough to let me have an art copy of Slow Burn, which I guess we should show the real cover. I don't want to show the,
Oh,
I don't wanna,
so,
this is
so,
Slow Burn.
sure. So this
Yes. Look at that. Love the cover, by the way.
Lasse Paldanis is a Finnish writer that, excuse me, well, Finnish artist. I'm sure he writes too. That Anita and I met when we went to Helsinki for Worldcon
Wow.
back in I guess it was 2017,
Wow.
and this is his art, and I love it.
Is she pouring buttons?
Yes, her. Let me move her closer to the. I don't know how well you
Yeah, I
can
can
see
see
that.
him. I'm
Yeah, yeah.
I'm I'm familiar with the theme of buttons because of a conversation you and I have had before. Maybe you can share that with the audience a little
Sure,
bit.
sure. So to continue this disjointed narrative, um, I wrote a story. I guess I wrote it in 2006 or so, or maybe early 2007, called "The Button Bin," and this was inspired by a visit that uh, my wife and I made to a local fabric store. And while she was out doing some serious shopping, I kind of found a place to, goof around. And I was next to this huge, it was an RC cola machine, laid on its face with all the guts hollowed out, and it was filled to the absolute top with buttons.
Mm.
And I started running my arm through the buttons. And then I had this idea, like, what if I pulled my arm out and the buttons had stuck to my arm? And then, uh, what if I was then able to unbutton my skin once that had happened? And when this idea hit me, this entire story is essentially exploded into my head. There were some pieces missing that took a while to figure out, but the plot was definitely there. And that story was the button bin, and that ended up being a finalist for the Nebula
Wow.
in 2009.
Awesome.
And so and there's 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 a part of, I don't want any poets to feel bad when I say this, that we all have a tough, we all have tough rows to hoe, but the 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 amount of attention and recognition that resulted from me being a nominee for the Nebula,
Mm.
even though I ultimately lost, was uh, many orders of magnitude greater than for the three Rising Awards that I had won for my poetry.
Wow.
So there was a lesson for me there that, okay, I'm starting to feel like I'm starting to feel like I've gotten as far as I can in this one field, and and now I've just been provided with evidence that there's a much bigger playground
Mm.
that maybe I should be testing out.
Wow.
And so uh, the story of the button bin, uh, uh, I didn't originally plan it this way, but it begat two sequels and a prequel. And one of those sequels is included in Slow Burn, which
Nice.
which which is which is why Lasse chose to rep. This is actually a specific character from my novella, The Comforter. There's no scene exactly like this, but those of you who end up being inspired to get the book and read it will recognize what the inspiration for that image is for sure. But
And so Slow Burn comes out in July
that's
16th,
right. That's
right?
right.
So July 16th it'll be available, and
Everywhere.
it's a collection. I mean, kind of back to our previous point, it's a collection that it kind of caught me off guard when I saw the amount of poetry in there. I was like, "Oh wow, this is great!" Because I'm a huge fan of poetry, and your poetry is awesome.
Wow, thank you.
I was like, "Wow, this is really good," but it was I wasn't expecting that much poetry in there, and it's a very nice balance between the poetry, the short stories, and I actually think the poetry just brings this thing right up. It makes it so colorful. I love it.
Thank you. Well, I have to give credit where credit is due. So one of the things that I learned, uh, as a publisher, again, kind of talking about how I keep just sort of doing everything instead of settling on one thing. I now have like my own little publishing company, Mythic Delirium Books,
Right?
and how that came about is like a whole another long story. But so my wife Anita worked with me as an editor, and she has this knack for taking, say, piles of poems or piles of stories or piles of stories and poems, and arranging them in a way that's really meaningful, so that the themes kind of flow into each other and the images kind of reflect each other. And uh, her there's a whole series of anthologies that I edited called Clockwork Phoenix,
Hmm.
and she was the one who would arrange the stories, and uh, was was so good at it that it was something that people would remark about when they read the books. It's about the flow of the themes, and so of course I asked her to do this for my own books when and in the case of Slow Burn. So if you don't mind my going into a little
No, absolutely.
digression. So kind of you remember me mentioning Clive Barker's books of blood.
Right.
Well, the way most people in America experienced those was as a kind of 3 volume trilogy.
Mm.
It's really it's really either one giant book or 6 volumes. But in America, books 1 through 3 were what was published. And so I think of my 3 horror collections as kind of my own books of blood, volumes 1 through 3. And that may make me full of it. I don't know, but it's a thing that's in my head. And so my first horror collection, Unseaming.
Love
Yeah.
this cover, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Oh,
Daniel Tunstall, who did this cover, is just an amazing artist.
that was the first thing I bought of yours. I saw that. I was like, I have to get this. It was that and the Blackfire Concerto. Both of
Oh
those.
yes, which thank you for getting both of those. So Unseaming is kind of my book 1, and it has basically no poetry in it because I think when I put this together, I was kind of wanting to. I was kind of wanting to break the common image people had of me of like somebody who basically just wrote poetry. Though there is this is the book that has the button bin in it,
Mhm.
uh, and also the direct sequel, The Quilt Maker, as other stories. There is like a poem hidden, and if you look at the table of contents and look at the titles of the 3 sections that I divided the book into, they make a haiku. So
Ah,
that was like my one sort of subtle tribute to my
nice.
other self, my other self. Um, and then the with what I consider kind of volume 2, Aftermath of an Industrial Accident.
Love it.
Same cover artist. Uh, so I had by this point several poems that were out but kind of orphaned because I didn't have any kind of new poetry collection planned, and I didn't have enough new material for it. And so Anita and I decided to include those poems in this book, and so they're not they're not all through the book like they are in Slow Burn. They're just kind of every so often, and Anita felt that they would serve well as kind of section dividers without announcing that that's what they were.
Gotcha.
And so that's the role they kind of play in Aftermath. And then with Slow Burn, I had a similar situation where I had uh you know I had, somewhat to my just surprise and delight, realized that I had enough fiction together for another horror collection. And I again had these kind of orphaned poems, and a few more of them than before. And Anita basically said, "Well, why don't we just put one in front of every single story,
There you go.
and use and so instead of section dividers, they're more like transitions from story to story.
Right.
And so to uh, I don't know how important this is to anybody, but to kind of to accomplish that, I ended up rating some of my older material. So uh, one of the one of the poems that one of my poems that won the Riesling, you know, umpteen billion years ago, is in here. It's the strip search.
Oh, I was hoping you were going to say the Dream Eaters.
So the Dream Eaters is from that same era.
Okay.
It actually kind of thrills me that you mentioned the Dream Eaters because
Uh,
something that those two poems have in common,
hmm.
the Strip Search and the Dream Eaters, is that they were they were performed on stage before they were ever published. I wrote them for
Nice.
the stage first. Uh, so
Nice.
so and so there's a I don't know if I'll ever get to deploy this, but part of my reasons for including those two poems in this book is because when we get to the point where I'm actually giving public readings, you know, knock on wood, I know I have a couple of pieces in the book that I know are good, like, you know,
Brilliant.
for an audience.
I like your planning.
So thank you.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I'm a huge fan of it. I was one of those people who grew up writing a lot of poetry, but never thought you could ever I was ever be able to do anything with it. I've never even published a single poem that I wrote. Now I look back at them and I laugh because, 16 or whatever, but like um,
Right.
all the teenage angst you could imagine.
Oh, sure, sure. Well, you know what I actually wrote at 16 was like heavy metal lyrics.
Yeah. There you go. Was it all like South of Heaven? Like,
You know, definitely along those lines. I think
there you go.
so. Slayer was not. I didn't encounter South of Heaven until in college. I think maybe Rain and Blood had come out, but I hadn't encountered that yet. But I had encountered like Black Sabbath and Venom
Oh
and
yeah.
you know.
Dude,
So,
you just mentioned Venom.
yes, I did.
There's people out there going, "Wait, what's that?"
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
just
love it.
going
That's how
very old school here.
that's how you just get you just definitely got your old school like dark metal stamp there.
Right.
Um, I guess I can't say dark metal because it's an actual subgenre now that didn't exist back then, but whatever.
Well, there's so many subgenres. They confuse me to a
Ah,
degree. I'm like I can't tell the difference between like death metal and deathcore and grindcore and you know.
Horrorcore and
Yeah.
death grinding and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a big fan of the old school stuff too. So I'm happy to hear all of that. And I
Sure.
mean, it is uh pretty cool to hear someone say that Slayer influenced them, and you did well with poetry.
So actually I can go one better. So
Yeah.
my story, Let There Be Darkness,
Okay.
which is in uh which is in Unseaming,
Okay.
and which was which was originally published in a little now long gone zine called Penny Dreadful,
Penny Dreadful. Yeah.
and then reprinted by the same editor in The Bible of Hell. This was an actual paperback book, and
What's it
then
about?
so let there be
I'm just kidding.
sure so Let There Be Darkness is directly inspired by the song South of Heaven.
Nice.
Yeah, it is basically me transcribing the imagery that came
Oh,
into my mind hearing that song.
dude, seeing the art that was around that album when I was younger, I mean,
Right.
it was just so cool. I was like, look at this demonic craziness. And there was like all this people were up in arms about censorship and Ozzy Osbourne and all the things,
Yeah, I know. It's wild to, you know, like it's wild to look at Judas Priest now being
Yeah.
kind of regarded as you know, these sort of lovable, cuddly old kooks, and you know, I still remember, you know, the actual court trial where they
Uh,
were accused of causing, these
Yeah.
suicides,
Yeah.
and it's just mind,
Yeah. Play Ozzy Osbourne backwards. Judas
right.
Priest is, causing suicides. Like there was all this crazy. I mean, it got crazy in the 80s
Yes.
with this stuff. Was it I can't remember if well, I'm not gonna mention any names because I'll get it wrong and then I'll be sued. But I was gonna say there were some pretty prominent politicians' spouses that were pushing a lot of that
Yep.
stuff back then.
Yep.
And
Yep. Yep.
yeah, it was
No,
supposed to.
I know exactly. I'll say it because it was Al Gore's wife,
Yeah, it was
Tipper
Tipper
Gore,
Gore.
who was the leader of the PMRC,
Yeah.
which Megadeth has a great song about
Yes.
the PMRC.
Yeah, Tipper Gore, man, she was on fire for that stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, all right, so I've got to ask you this question. This is one that I always go. I was telling you this before. I draw if someone asks me this question, I almost always go, I got to go look at my phone. But is there like what have you been reading lately? Like what would you like right now if I said, Mike, what are you reading that's just got you, man? That just you just are absolutely loving it and you think I should go check it out. Is there anything you've read lately that just kind of you really enjoyed?
Yes. So I recently read, among multiple things,
Sure.
uh, Silvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic.
Oh, I've been dying to read that.
So that is, that is that boy, that's a fascinating book, and that was like her breakthrough.
Right.
She's now on a total new level because of that book.
Right.
And the an interesting thing for me reading that is, I went on a binge reading Shirley Jackson, which, I mean, something else I would certainly recommend if you've not done that.
Mhm.
I think for a lot of the more sort of hardcore horror folks, Shirley Jackson is a name that we know, but maybe we've not read that much of her work.
Right.
And my youngest brother got me, for Christmas one year, the Shirley Jackson box set
Oh, cool.
from the Library of America. It's like all six novels and like 40 some short stories, and now I've read all of it.
Wow.
so so I'm now somebody who's read a lot of her body of work as opposed to just a couple stories. And uh, I thought that Mexican Gothic turned out to be a really sort of, I don't know that she was deliberately, I can't say that she was deliberately, you know, incorporating, you know, and subverting Jackson's tropes.
Mm.
But in effect, she was certainly doing that, because most of it, most of Mexican Gothic takes place in this sort of lumbering, in this sort of lumbering old mansion with this, with this rich decrepit family that has this awful history, and that's certainly something that Jackson uh,
Sure.
evoked more than once.
Yeah.
The haunting of Hill House, and we have always lived in the
Lived in this castle.
castle,
Yeah.
and the Sundial, another of her novels,
See,
which,
I've never read The Sundial.
yeah, there's like four. Most people only know of the two. There's six. She
Right.
has six novels. and, so um and the four that you have not heard of are a little bit tougher to read. They're not as accessible, except for The Bird's Nest.
Hmm.
I think if people aren't maybe reading The Bird's Nest regularly today because it all hinges on kind of a very outdated concept of what multiple of what, multiple personality or dissociative disorder
Hmm.
is. But it's a riveting book. Once you kind of accept that, okay, this is what this book's going to be about, it's
Gotcha.
absolutely riveting. But so, um Jackson's heroines are all these like sort of nervous, easily frightened, clearly starting the slide to a mental breakdown. That's almost universally that's the kind of person she chooses as a protagonist. And Mexican Gothic, which I would say also has some Lovecraftian elements, and it's neat to see that because Sylvia is actually a Lovecraft scholar. She knows her Lovecraft way better than most. But so her protagonist, she picks somebody whose personality type is not what you normally see in these
Mm.
stories. Somebody who's kind of this tough party girl,
Ah.
who has uh who has no appreciable experience with the supernatural,
Mm.
but just feels no need to tolerate fools. and that introduces like a whole new novel element to this kind of gothic dynamic.
Mm.
And these gradual revelations of horrific past crimes and supernatural horrors. And but the character that you're seeing this all through is not, again, the sort of person you usually see in this kind of story, and that makes a big difference, makes it kind of fun, and makes it kind of fun and inventive in its way. uh
I've been dying to read it.
yeah, yeah, I highly recommend it. So this one I actually haven't reached. Of course, I'm a huge Laird Barron fan.
Oh,
Laird wrote the introduction to Unseaming, and I
right.
will always, treasure that he was willing to do that for me. 'Cause he's a busy guy. But his newest, his
Yes.
his newest, The Wind Began to Howl, um, it is technically part of his Isaiah Coleridge series, which is kind of a crime slash mystery series of stories. But there's there's a sort of edge of inexplicable to it that makes it kind
Hmm.
of a. Sorry if you can hear my cat.
Oh no, but we'd be happy to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's the cat's name?
This is Pandora.
Pandora.
Yeah. So we clean Pandora's box every week.
Oh, there you go.
In
Nice.
fact, she's in a box lid right now. It's where she
Oh,
sleeps.
that's awesome.
Yeah, you can't. The camera's aimed so you can't see her. Uh, Here, maybe I can see. Yeah, there she is.
Hey.
So,
We've had all
um,
kinds of animal guests on the show, man. That's great.
sure, yeah, yeah, yeah. But there's a kind of edge of the inexplicable to it that makes it sort of a kissing cousin to his kind of classic horror stories. The
Nice.
Indigo sequence and the procession of the Black Sloth, uh, and the occultation. If, this is obnoxious, but I'm never going to get tired of telling people this. Laird wrote his story Occultation, the Occultation, for me, for
Oh,
for the Clockwork Phoenix anthologies.
oh,
So
nice.
so so I'm the reason it exists.
Yes. Take
Yeah,
that, Laird.
yeah.
Well,
Thanks, Laird.
I mean, clearly he's doing pretty well from, yeah.
Right, right, right. Well,
And
I'm very excited about his new collection that's coming out, Not a Speck of Light. So that's his first horror collection in several years. So
yeah, I love seeing this. I love seeing people switch formats. I love seeing people switch genres and even subgenres, and
sure.
and do it very well, and pull it off every time, because I feel like there's this unspoken assumption that, oh, once you're here, that's it. That's what you got. This is what you kind of become known for. You're locked in.
It's definitely a problem on the marketing side. Uh,
Sure, sure.
yeah, yeah.
On the algorithms,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
pointing all the right people to the right places.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, you know, I mean, perhaps if I were to pick a lane, like we might be talking about my 10th novel now or something like that. No, that's not the way that I've gone. Um, so in terms of other recent reads, so I'm sort of afraid. I'm sort of afraid to bring this one up because I'm going to mangle the author's name if I try to pronounce it. But the
Okay.
book is Tender as the Flesh.
I have it.
Yes, yes.
I have it. I think right here somewhere. Continue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm pretty
But
sure. Oh, never mind. I'm thinking a pound of flesh from.
no, so Augustina
Yeah, I was thinking of Alexander Ward.
Basterica. I hope this is right. Augustina Basterica is the author of Tender is the Flesh, and uh, so that's a fascinating. This is interesting. The literary world seems to have really kind of fallen in love with that book.
I mean,
I,
she
I
has
yeah,
had tremendous success with that book.
right. I think if you're a horror fan, a lot of what she does is kind of familiar turf. So, but it's her style and approach that make it interesting to experience. So, do you know the general concept of Tender as the Flesh?
I do not.
So it's not far removed from say Soylent Green
Yeah.
or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part Two. Um,
Here.
in that there has been a kind of cataclysmic ecological change so that uh, so that animals are no longer safe to eat or
Mhm.
available to eat, or at least there's a widespread belief that this is the case. And so now the main source of meat for humans is humans. And um sh- and what Bazterica does, please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, is kind of kind of with what kind of seems like scientific detachment, uh, create a portrait of what of how a society like this might work.
Like a modern cannibal.
Yeah, yeah, like a whole sort of social order and ecosystem, and
Wow.
she goes into kind of tremendous detail about not just like the process of procuring the meat, but how it's kind of the sort of the things that happen socially that let people kind of rationalize and accept what's happening, and
Wow.
without essentially feeling guilty about it or publicly admitting it.
Right.
And it's a fascinating read. It's a fascinating read. The main character is uh this is maybe a little bit of a quibble on my part. The main character is kind of somebody who mostly passively observes,
Hmm.
uh but it 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 does the narrative does reach a point where uh it looks like this narrator is going to need to make a moral choice. And uh I will say I appreciate that what he ends up doing is a bit of a curveball. Uh, you
Yay!
know,
I love curveball.
defies what appears to have been set up. But I don't want to spoil it beyond that. And there's also uh, I think it's I think it's probably probably wrong to call it anything like a romance. There's kind of a at its center is also this sort of you know icky relationship between a privileged human and a human who is part of the food class. Although again, that's turf that has sort of been explored before. If you've ever read Harlan Ellison's again, Dangerous Visions,
I haven't read that. Yeah.
there's a story by of all people, or maybe it's not surprising. There's a story by Piers Anthony
Hmm.
that uh, about humans as cattle that kind of goes there. and, but in not with, I would say, the elegance
Hmm.
that it's hand with which it's handled in Tender as the Flash. So
Oh man, that sounds fascinating.
yeah, it's a I do think I maybe wasn't as blown away by it as some people who have read it and enthused about it, but it's definite. I understand why it's earned its reputation. If you get
Well,
me.
you've got me pretty excited because I've heard of it.
Cool.
I haven't even put it on my TBR, but I have heard of it. And Mexican Gothic is like in the chamber, man, ready to rock.
Oh, that's a great book.
So I'm really excited to hear about both of these because one I've been looking forward to, and the other I've heard about, but I didn't really know a whole lot about. Now it's gonna have to it's gonna have to go in the files.
So, so something I did that maybe kind of defeats the purpose of your question a little bit. But my most recent reading, I got a hankering for some. Um, the horror community is still mourning the death of Peter Straub.
Right.
Who I actually got to meet.
Wow.
He was somebody who was one of my heroes as a teenager. So and
Amazing.
yeah,
Amazing writer.
and he would remember me when I saw him again.
Oh yeah.
And I think for good reasons. So I got an urge to kind of revisit him, but I did it in kind of a strange way, um, because he was the editor of he was the editor of the Library of America edition of Lovecraft's stories.
Hmm.
And so I guess I had like Library of America in my head from having, read all those thousands of pages of Shirley Jackson.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine gifted me with that Lovecraft volume, and uh, a novel of his that I remembered really enjoying, but read it long enough ago that I couldn't remember it all that well anymore, was Mr. X.
Hmm.
And I don't know how much you might know about Mr. X,
I've
but
never touched it.
it's his it's his undermining of it's his personal take at undermining and kind of reimagining Lovecraft's tropes.
Hmm.
And so I decided to first read Peter's volume of Lovecraft stories. So gorging on H.P. Lovecraft for better for worse for several weeks there. Uh, but it was interesting because the stories they're arranged in chronological order, and reading them that way uh, kind of illustrates how Lovecraft seemed to evolve both as a writer and as a person, and it kind of makes clearer some of the connections he draws between his different stories, which is something I like to do in my stories too. So it was kind of neat to visit that, and then reading all that, and then going and rereading Mr. X, Peter's own kind of processing of Lovecraft. It made it kind of heightened the experience for me. If you so the gimmick in Mr. X, uh, it starts out, it evolves through the course of the book toward being kind of like a mystery thriller, but it starts out as kind of a straight up supernatural slasher
Hmm.
story. And the gimmick is that the killer, the vile Mr. X, is somebody who he genuinely has supernatural powers, very scary ones. But he believes that he was granted those powers by entities from the Cthulhu mythos. Delusionally believes this, and so the book features entries in his diary, and they're written in this sort of very florid imitation of Lovecraft's prose.
Mm.
And so it's like it's simultaneously a very suspenseful story and yet kind of a satire on Lovecraft at the same time.
Nice.
The kind of thing only Straub could pull off.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
yeah, it was delightful to get to revisit that.
You have given me probably the most thorough list of other authors to like to note in the show notes. I'm
Oh,
like,
cool.
I'm like jotting them all down so I can make sure we get everybody's name in the show notes. Um, it's amazing how how awesome this has been because it's been so totally unique. I don't think there's been an element of this conversation that has been replicated with any other interview I've ever had on the show, which
Glad
is
to be of service.
yeah, which no condemnation or casting anything onto any of the other guests. Each of these interviews has been so eye-opening to me as a person who stepped away from the industry, just stepped away from the craft for so long and came back. And it's been, I mean, Mike, you're a wealth of knowledge, and I've really appreciated the amount of time and effort you've spent kind of unpacking all these things. Your journey to becoming a writer is fascinating. What a unique background. I mean, dude, Guam, then Southwestern Virginia. That's
Right,
nuts.
right. Yeah, it is definitely. There are some parts of childhood I didn't much enjoy, but I
Sure.
I am for the most part pretty happy with who I've ended up being.
Yeah.
And I guess I had to go through that stuff to get there.
Yeah.
So
Well, with your extensive catalog, I mean, dude, I mean, anyone who wants to. So before the shows, I always go look up everyone's stuff. And when I opened up your Amazon author account, I was like, whoa. I mean, like quite quite a lot of work in your career. And it's so great to be able to share all of this with other people. And I hope that people will listen to this episode and go check out your um like where's the best place to find out more about now that I'm saying it, I'm like, is your website the best place to learn more about you?
so I guess I have an author website,
Right.
descentintolight.com.
Okay.
And that's a line. I mentioned like way back at the beginning of this that there are many, many Mike Allens. There's like no chance in hell I'm ever gonna have mikeallen.com. So Descent into Light is a line from one of my poems. And
Right.
so that's been my the URL for my personal uh website. And I do try to post updates there with some regularity. Um, and also the mythicdelirium.com website, which is the website for our little publishing company. There's a lot of Nowadays there's a lot of duplicate content between the two, uh, because it's to me it's all sort of one thing, whether I'm publishing somebody else or pushing some of my own work, or it's all kind of together. Um,
Mythic Delirium.
and uh, on I'm active. I guess I guess everybody these days is kind of trying to figure out the new social media paradigm. I am still on Twitter. I feel, you know, though, I understand why some of my colleagues have left. I feel like there are people who I can only reach there, so I'm not planning on going anywhere. Well, in fact, one of my one of my authors, who I'm this is Yukimi Ogawa's debut collection, Like Smoke, Like Light. Pretty much Twitter is where I can reach her. She's, she's based in Tokyo, and this collection was the first my that we ever tried with, an author who is not based in the United States, and
Mhm.
so far so good. Um, but so I'm experimenting with Instagram and with Threads and with Blue Sky, and and uh, but what's common to all of those is the handle Mythic Delirium. Mythic Delirium is me. You can
Gotcha.
find, if you can remember how to spell Mythic Delirium, that will lead to me.
We'll put that in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And uh except for Facebook. On Facebook I'm Time Shark, which is
Time Shark.
another which is from another poem of mine, the
Gotcha.
Petting the Time Shark. But there's links to maybe not all of those, but several of those at descentintolight.com. So,
Well, you're definitely more creative with your handles than I have been. I've literally just used different derivatives of my name.
well, it might make people easier to find you. I've told you I never really do anything the right way.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not saying it's the right or wrong way. I just realized like, oh, I've written all this nonfiction. I want to write fiction. Oh, you gotta write a pen
Right,
name.
right,
Well, I don't want to just use some random person's name. Like, I want it to be my name. It's like, well,
right,
then you better start using those initials or something, dude. It's like, I probably could have been a little bit more creative and used one of my characters or something, but
well, if it's working for you,
yeah,
it's
we'll see. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
thank
I mean,
you.
dude, we're gonna have to get you back. Am I gonna see you at any conferences in 24? Or do you have anything planned?
So I don't have anything nailed down precisely yet,
Mhm.
but I am planning. Anita and I are planning to come to ReaderCon in Boston, which
Okay,
that should be in July. Uh, don't hold me to that date, because I just spouted
sure.
that off the top of my head. And also we're planning for the first time to come to Necronomicon in Providence,
Oh, nice.
and and I'll be kind of on a book tour, sort of promoting Slow Burn, but I'll also be there wearing my publisher hat, promoting all these other books we have.
Nice.
So I know at ReaderCon our plan is to have a table. I don't yet know if that will work at uh, Necronomicon, but I'd love to do that.
Excellent. Well,
And
I mean, for anyone that's listening, if you guys are at the event, make sure you swing by and see Mike and Anita, and I'm sure she'll be with you. I'm
yes,
assuming, and make sure that you guys check out Mythic Delirium books while you're there, because
yes,
that's how I met Mike. I think we initially met at StokerCon in
that's
23,
right, that's right. I think
and
I was at one of the autograph tables.
yeah, you were at the autograph table, and I saw the cover for Unseaming, and I was like, oh, I love this. Actually, I saw the cover for Black Fire Concerto, and I was like, oh, look at that. And you were like, pretty cool, huh? And then we start talking, and off we go. Because
Always happy to have conversations like that. Yeah,
yeah,
I hope when we next talk, in whatever format it is, to have some interesting news to share regarding Blackfire Concerto. But
oh,
at the moment, that's pretty much all I can say.
suspense.
Yes, yes,
Throw it in the air. It'll sit there until
right.
we get to the next episode, and then you can fill us in on all of that. Um,
Hover
but
in the air for several months until we
that's
catch
right.
up
Just
again.
keep it suspended. Everyone go to sleep every night thinking about it. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for spending so much of your time unpacking your career, talking to us about your work. I mean, just fascinating. Opened my mind to so many different elements of your background that I was unaware of up until this conversation. And I think that um, I've I'm walking away a bit more inspired than I think that maybe I anticipated, in not necessarily more so, but like in different ways. Like, just awesome, man. Awesome career, awesome background. You've done it all: poetry, collections, zines. You've been in the professional industry as a what am I trying to say? Not newscaster.
Well, reporter, newspaper reporter.
Reporter. Thank you. My brain's not working so much today. And it's very inspiring for me. I mean, I came from a way different world and come to this came to this world from military engineering, and it's just fascinating to meet people and learn their path, and be able to share that with watchers, listeners, and readers. And I hope that this gives people insight into you and your work, and that they'll fall in love with both you and your work, and go out there and just get every chance they can to meet you, because you've been an absolute blessing to see and talk with every time I've ever encountered you. And you're good people, man. So I appreciate you making the time to come on the show. Thank
Wow,
you.
thank you. Wow. So it definitely warms my dark heart to hear all of that. Thank you so much.
Well, you'll be back again sometime this year, I'm sure. We'll make sure we drag you in here after the big launch of Slow Burn. You can tell us all about your newfound success there.
So
So,
I hope to be able to do that, but I love to do it regardless.
that's right. Go pick up all the stuff. I want to see everyone like looking at copies of Unseaming. We need more button stories. Slow Burn's going to be awesome. And I'm just excited that you were able to come on here and share all this with us. So, Mike, thank you so much, and guys, we'll see you in the next episode. Take
Thanks
it
so much,
easy.
Lucas.